This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
And a very happy Friday, everyone. Yes, indeed, it is Friday, September 12th, 2025. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec live here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York City. As Tim just teased for the radio folks and YouTube folks, I mean, yeah, a little bit of a stall in the equity trade, but man, you get a few records in a week and you're still up about 1.7%. So yeah, it's okay to take a breather.
Not every day can be another record day. Consumer data did little to alter bets the Fed will cut rates in September. We're going to, of course, hear from Jay Powell next week. And that's really the backdrop for today's trade. And I think every day going into Wednesday. Carol.
No, that's a really, really good point, that Fed meeting next week and decision. Hey, having said that, another thing that is definitely on our mind has been this year, and that has to do with the one commodity that is outpacing most major market averages this year. We're going to get into that with Axel Merk in just a moment.
It's not Bitcoin.
No.
It's not Bitcoin.
It's not.
It's an actual commodity.
It is.
All right, don't get mad at me online for saying that, everybody. Also, Tesla shares on a tear as Elon gets a big stamp of approval.
He did indeed. A great interview by our B-Tech team. We're going to get into that. We're also going to talk about the new options exchange in, what do we call that? Wall Street South?
That's what they're calling it. I mean, now I guess it officially is.
All right, so we're going to talk about that. And then former acting CDC director, Dr. Richard Besser, now president and CEO of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. He's going to join us along with a member of our Bloomberg News team who have done a lot of reporting on the CDC, what we need to know about the role of that organization and really what its role is when it comes to healthcare in the United States, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will, to be fair. So we're going to get to that over the next 60 minutes.
All that and more. First up, though, a check of the day's trade and top business stories. Here he is, Charlie Kirk.
Hi, thank you very much, Tim. Going to begin with Gemini space station jumping as much as 64% from the IPO price, now up by just about 43% after the cryptocurrency exchange led by the billionaire Winklevoss twins raised $425 million in a packed week for U.S. listings. Again, Gemini right now up by 42.9%. BlackRock Coffee also going out this morning. It is up by roughly 34% on BlackRock Coffee. The Dow lower, S&P, NASDAQ both advancing, as Carol mentioned, on track for a winning week on the S&P. Right now we got the S&P little changed, higher by 5, up under 0.1%. Any advance today, however, will be a record on the S&P. NASDAQ also trading up at a record, advancing another 106 now, up 0.5, and the Dow down by 0.4%. Our Mag 7 index up 1.6%. The 10-year 4.06%, with the 2-year at 3.55%. Gold is up $14 the ounce, up 0.4%, 36.48. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.4, 62.60 for a barrel of WTI. Workers at Boeing St. Louis area defense factories will remain on strike after union members rejected a third contract from management. It is only the third strike in half-century by the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local 837. Boeing today down by 1.5%. Also, the FAA will fine Boeing $3.1 million for a series of safety violations. Recapping, S&P up 4 right now, up 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
For those keeping check on this, Gemini space, it is still up about 35%, 63% though at its highs already today. Keep in mind, it just opened about 22 minutes ago. We did already have one halt, so we're going to keep a watch certainly on that activity. All right, that is certainly top of mind, but so is too what has been happening and what did happen across the country earlier this week, Tim.
The suspect in the killing of Charlie Kirk was identified as Tyler Robinson, 22 years old, of Utah. This coming after a tip from a family member led to his apprehension. A family member told investigators that Robinson had become more political in recent years and had criticized Kirk as, quote, full of hate and spreading hate shortly before the shooting. Earlier today, Utah Governor Spencer Cox spoke on rounding up the suspect.
We got him on the evening of September 11th. a family member of Tyler Robinson reached out to a family friend who contacted the Washington County Sheriff's Office with information that Robinson had confessed to them or implied that he had committed the incident. Investigators interviewed a family member of Robinson who stated that Robinson had become more political in recent years. The family member referenced a recent incident in which Robinson came to dinner prior to September 10th, and in the conversation with another family member, Robinson mentioned Charlie Kirk was coming to UVU.
That's Utah Governor Spencer Cox earlier today at a press conference in Utah. He was there with FBI Director Kash Patel and other law enforcement officials. For the latest, we bring back somebody who's been covering this story nonstop. Myles Miller joins us here in the Bloomberg News studio. He's a senior reporter who covers crime. He joins us right here in the studio. Myles, what is the latest on this? We heard a lot from the press conference earlier, but what more do we know about this individual?
Yeah, these are the charging documents. They just came out from Utah, and what we learned is that he'll be charged with aggravated murder, felony discharge of a firearm, and obstruction of justice. And prosecutors are really painting a vivid picture of what happened here. The start of him walking across campus, going through a tunnel, picking up his phone, getting to the roof, the moment he fires a shot, jumping off the roof. All of that detailed in this document, and it really paints the picture of someone who, according to a roommate in this, was specifically targeting Charlie Kirk because he believed that he was full of hate and was spreading hate.
You know, what's interesting too, Myles, and I think I heard you talking with either the surveillance team earlier today or another member of our team on air, but this idea that if folks hadn't come forward, we might not be having this discussion. We might not have his name at this point.
Right. You know, as I read through this charging document, it's very clear that, you know, it took a family member reaching out to a family friend, the youth pastor, for this case to get to this point. I think law enforcement often does this appeal for any people who have any knowledge of what happened, putting out photographs so that people could see somebody and say, okay, this is a person I know. That's what led to the arrest in this case. A father sees his son, says you should turn yourself in. He says, I'd rather kill myself. And no, doing the right thing, getting this youth pastor who happens to be a task force officer to bring him into justice.
Myles, what do we know about the ideology of this individual? Because in the moments after the assassination, we started hearing from officials within the Trump administration, and even the president himself, just hours, that this was politically motivated. And that was before they even had him in custody. What do we know now that he's in custody about not just potential motivations, but ideologies here?
Yeah, so just reading through this court document, in it, investigators asked the roommate to show him messages on Discord, which is the social media app where people have private conversations. In it, Tyler, the suspect in this case, the roommate thinks he's joking about this, but he says in detail he needed to retrieve a rifle from a drop point. He had left the rifle in the bushes, and he said he was watching the area where the rifle was left, said he wrapped it in a towel. That's everything that investigators said that they found when they went to look for it. And he joked about being responsible for causing Charlie Kirk's death. And investigators believe that, plus the physical evidence, has them at their suspect.
But I do think it's interesting, and I think we were also very quick to jump to, it's a political crime. And we all also put out these, cautionary words of we need to kind of understand what was behind this individual in an environment that is already very politically charged. And I guess we'll continue to find out. They obviously will do some questioning of him. Have they done so far, or what do we know about the suspect? Tyler Robinson, where he is right now and what's going on. Yeah,
so he's currently being held in the Utah County Sheriff's jail right now. He won't go before a judge likely until Monday or Tuesday. They have a weird provision in Utah where they have 3 days to present the case, whereas here, of course, in New York, you want to get to arraignment within the 24 hours because of our rules, but it's different that way. I reached out to his family to see who the attorney was who was representing him. Because you would imagine in a case like this that, a suspect in such a high-profile shooting probably wouldn't talk to investigators, but he was forthright when he was when he was encountered by the first officers who came because of that family member, and saying that he was responsible for this, that obviously will go part of the court case.
The federal response to this, Myles, you cover Homeland Security and the FBI. FBI Director Kash Patel was there. He did speak during this press conference. What can you tell us about the coordination with federal and state and local authorities?
Right. So from the beginning, this has been a Utah-led investigation with the help of FBI. Utah can't do it alone. FBI got 11,000 tips in 2 days.
Wow.
It took the FBI 33 hours to close this case. Kash Patel talks about bringing in air resources, so bringing in planes to be able to fly all that evidence to the FBI's facility on the East Coast at Quantico to run that latent print to see if the shoe print was anything specific. All of that
They
is very
can't do
crucial.
that anywhere else in the field?
So FBI has labs in different parts of the country, but the best lab is at Quantico. The gun was flown to the ATF lab centrally located in the South. So Salt Lake City office of the FBI is much smaller than many of the other offices. And so you need to bring in all those resources. But Kash Patel told that story of the plane literally flying evidence back. I mean, the plane not staffed with a bunch of agents, but with evidence to get it as quickly as possible.
This is a federal crime, or will be pursued as a federal crime. And so he faces federal charges and federal penalty. Like, how does that?
Right now, and the same thing with Mangione, is that it starts off now as a local crime. Now, they have the death penalty there. So in this case, maybe the U.S. Attorney's Office won't take it.
All right. Incredible update, and you have been following this nonstop for us, so thank you so much. Myles Miller, senior reporter covering Homeland Security and the FBI here at Bloomberg News. All right, now we want to get to some market news. There's a lot going on, and it's not just Gemini, which is still up about 31% in its first day of trading, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. We are also watching some of what's going on in some of the different asset classes, and I don't know if you've checked out gold recently, Tim, but it has rallied by nearly 40% this year. It is making it one of the best performing commodities, outpacing other market gauges, and that includes the S&P 500.
Central bank buying, geopolitical uncertainties, inflows into ETFs, all supporting the commodity. Our next guest is someone we've turned to for years to talk gold and much more. Back with us is Axel Merk, president and CIO of Merk Investments, joining us from Menlo Park on the West Coast. He manages the ASA Gold and Precious Metals Fund, up more than 100% so far this year. The Van Eck Merk Gold ETF, with about $2 billion in AUM, meantime, is up 38% year to date and invests in the precious metal. Axel, Carol mentioned how well the fund has done and how well the commodity has done in recent years. But let's look forward. What is the outlook for the remainder of this year in your view for gold?
Great to be with you, and the fact that you're covering gold, I suppose, means it's got the attention of mainstream media.
So is that the top? Is this the top then? Is that what this means?
That, if anything, is the most pessimistic thing I've heard about gold in a long time.
Well said.
It took you so long to get me on the air, right? But I mean, obviously we've had a stunning run, right? And obviously we have to keep in mind, if something is this volatile on the way up, there's always a risk on the downside correction. That said, if there are two key drivers, I think. One is, in the US, we have an easing path at the Fed. And if you take the European Central Bank, for example, as far as the eye can see, rates are going to be steady. So we have a more dovish monetary policy. The other one is the broader debasement trade. And of course, is that correlation or causation is anybody's guess. If that is the case, that may have legs that might last years, so to speak, right? The dollar was always the cleanest shirt. One thing I'd like to mention that maybe not the other guests are not mentioning is when we talk about tariffs, it doesn't just impact the flow of goods, it impacts financial flows, because that's the other side of the goods trade. And so I happen to believe that a wrench has been thrown into the engine that we call the exorbitant privilege, that it's more difficult to use the US to finance things for higher returns abroad. Obviously, this is not a light switch or anything like that, but a side effect is higher borrowing costs in the US, and in the absence of fiscal discipline, it means more pressure on the Fed to lower rates, and we've obviously seen plenty of that. And so that's a dynamic that has a lot of way to play out. And of course, the other context is that valuations are somewhat high. And what do you, in the equity markets more broadly, and what do you do to diversify? Now, I'm not suggesting that gold is very cheap here, but gold historically is one of the things that does well in an easing environment, especially also does well if we were to have a more severe correction in the stock market. And so an increasing number of people have been looking for this sort of diversification.
Well, what's interesting, too, as we've seen gold take off, and you talk about throwing a wrench into the U.S.'s exorbitant privilege. I mean, I'm looking at the dollar, or at least the dollar index, Axel, which is down about 10% year to date. Tim and I constantly are asking guests, is the U.S. uninvestable? You know, are the days of the U.S. dollar running supreme over, although so much is still done in dollars? Like, I guess we're just trying to get an idea if this is a tipping point for the U.S. dollar. Especially, too, with the kind of rise of digital and stable coins, perhaps.
I don't think digital is stable. I mean, the stable coins are US dollar based. I happen to think that's supportive of the dollar, if anything. If you look at the breakdown in the G10, the best performing currency is the Swedish krona versus the dollar. And guess what? The Swedish economy is most, as part of its GDP, exposed to defense spending. And as you may be aware, Europe is ramping up its defense spending. So there are specific things, right? And of course, as a gold person, the debasement trade kind of fits into our narrative. Whether that's really the case it remains to be seen. There is, of course, more competition. Some people say that there is no alternative, and while that may be true, my argument is there does not need to be an alternative. What I foresee is a greater fragmentation. Because if you go back to the exorbitant privilege, part of that is it's kind of a machinery that provides liquidity for the world. And if that begins to sputter somehow or is less effective than it has been, less efficient,
right.
It doesn't mean the world coming to an end, but it means that less trade might be happening, more things might be happening locally. Ultimately, that's, of course, healthy for emerging markets in particular if they finance more things domestically. But we have some structural transformations. Yeah. And the dollar might be weakening in that process.
Hey, just got about 25 seconds, Axel. So buy gold, buy the commodity, buy the bullion, buy miners, or don't buy any of it at this point?
Well, I do both. I haven't sold any of them. Typically, the gold and gold miner buys are very different. The gold miners tend to be more speculative, especially go to the more juniors. And the physical gold through ETF or otherwise tends to be more of a diversification play. There's a lot that hasn't happened in the junior mining space. Very speculative, but some very interesting opportunities there.
All right, we promise we will catch up more often.
Hey, he was on in May. If you were watching us in May,
it's a little
you saw Axel, okay? So it was a little while ago, but you know.
We always appreciate it. Axel, have a great weekend. Axel Merk, President and Chief Investment Officer of Merk Investments. All right. We truly, truly respect all that is going on and is important to investors, and we're going to stay on it, including watching all of the day's IPOs. At the same time, the team here at Bloomberg Businessweek Daily has been thinking a lot about some of the stories that impact investors longer term, impact all of the Bloomberg audience, and that have often been in the headlines, but often get buried and lost in the never-ending flow of headlines, social media posts, and DC press events. And so today we wanted to take a look at the CDC. We're talking about the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which was the subject recently of a Bloomberg Businessweek deep dive. It was entitled, "America Will Get Sick as CDC's Total Overhaul Takes Shape." And Tim, that reporting by Bloomberg's Jessica Nix and Madison Muller.
Jessica Nix joins us now here in the studio. Also joining us today, Dr. Richard E. Besser, President and CEO of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, former acting director of the CDC, and the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry in early 2009. That was during the early months of the first Obama administration. He joins us from New Jersey. Dr. Besser, I do want to start with you and just big picture. I think many Americans would agree, regardless of their political affiliation, regardless of how they feel about what's happening at the CDC and HHS right now, that Americans are unhealthy in general, that Americans are sick, that the American health system has not been working for years. Why hasn't it? What hasn't been working?
Yeah, you know, I think that's the right diagnosis, and the big question is, what are the drivers of that? And there are many. You know, starting at the healthcare level, you know, healthcare is a small component of people's overall health, But it is important, and we're the only wealthy nation in which your ability to access healthcare is so dependent on where you happen to have a job. There are millions of people in our country who work more than one job per day who don't have access to high quality, comprehensive, affordable healthcare. And without that, they will tend to show up in emergency rooms. They'll show up late for care and be sicker. We also are seeing with the latest legislation out of Washington that tens of millions of people, in addition, are going to lose their healthcare access. So that will move us in the wrong direction. Some of the biggest drivers of health have to do with income and whether someone has the income to be able to afford healthy, nutritious food, whether they have the income and the leisure time to be able to get physical activity. These are critical components of health in America. But we are seeing that in America, the rates of chronic disease are extremely high, and we need to do more to address that. So I think that there probably is a lot of agreement around what the problem is. There is less agreement in terms of what the drivers of that are or what the solution should be.
All right, so let's get to, and I want to bring in Bloomberg News health reporter Jessica Nix, who wrote this story with Madison Muller. And Jessica, in your reporting, you note that there's a small but vocal contingent that's long been demanding changes at the CDC. And then with an ally in RFK Jr., the HHS secretary, finally getting these critics kind of getting what they want. But scientists are really worried because they feel like they've been sidelined. What is everyone so worried about?
Well, we've seen in the past few months since RFK came in to take over the Department of Health and Human Services, a complete dismantle at the CDC for what we've seen in the past. There was a lot of criticisms of the CDC during the COVID pandemic in terms of guidance around what schools should be doing, social distancing, masking. It really divided a lot of the public. Since RFK has come in, we've seen mass layoffs in terms of divisions that study chronic disease, gun violence, injury prevention. We've also seen the dismantle of a vaccine panel called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, who's supposed to meet next week, and handpicked members from RFK have now come into that panel and dismantled vaccine policy as we know it. In August, we also saw a shooting at the CDC, where the CDC was the attack from a gunman who fired nearly 500 rounds at the buildings. Weeks after that, the CDC director was fired weeks into her tenure over vaccine policy. So there's so much confusion and chaos at the CDC that the actual work is not as able to get done because everyone's gone.
So Dr. Besser, let's bring you in. I mean, the worry's justified. Do we need, I guess I want to take a step back because I think it's fair to say that sometimes we have institutions that have been in place for a long time, and there are aspects that get a little stale or that maybe could be improved. And so it's good to take a look at things. But I'm just wondering your view as a former acting director of the CDC, what needs to maybe be fixed at the CDC? What is maybe wrong about the current approach, and what is right maybe about the current approach?
Yeah, I mean, it is so important to look critically at our institutions and ask the question, how can they perform better? Where have they not performed well, and how do you address that? It's critical. I worked at the CDC for 13 years under Republican and Democratic administrations. I ran emergency preparedness for 4 years during the Bush administration, which is why I was made acting director at the start of the Obama administration to be able to respond to public health crises. What we're seeing here is the destruction of the world's leading public health agency. The CDC doesn't just provide public health expertise for the United States. It had been looked at as a beacon for public health around the world. That's no longer the case. The administration came in and haphazardly fired tens of thousands of federal health workers, so many people at the CDC. For an administration that is concerned about chronic disease, they eliminated the Office on Smoking and Health, and smoking is the leading preventable cause of chronic disease. There hasn't been any coherent approach to this. At the start of the Obama administration, there were efforts to look across the agency. Where was it lacking? Where could it do better? Before the start of the COVID pandemic, the public's take on the CDC was very high. It had very high approval ratings. But we saw with the COVID pandemic, CDC make some mistakes, but we also saw the intentional politicization of public health by an administration that saw the opportunity for political gain. And so across the nation, we saw hundreds of talented public health professionals be vilified. People leave their jobs, some forced out, some not able to take the stress or the blatant threats to their health and safety. And now with this administration, at a time where we need to rebuild trust, we have, as our Secretary of Health, one of the nation's leading anti-vaccine advocates and someone who has demonstrated no respect for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Dr. Besser, you mentioned that the CDC is this beacon of global public health. We saw what they did during the COVID pandemic, but what does this mean for future pandemics that might pop up if we have a dismantled CDC, not just for the US, but also for the world?
Okay, my heart just stopped beating because we are going to get another global pandemic, aren't we, Dr. Besser?
Yeah, the question is when, not if. But one of the challenges, it's not just the CDC being decimated. The elimination of USAID, the Agency for International Development. The CDC works very closely with USAID personnel around the globe to make sure that health departments are ready, public health professionals are ready to be able to detect and respond to signals very quickly. To ensure that other countries can control disease, but it also helps ensure that new diseases don't come to our shores. Dropping out of the World Health Organization, which is designed to be the body to help share information around the globe, help ensure that problems are contained where they arise. That is leaving us as a nation less secure, more defenseless. The cut of billions of dollars to the CDC means a cut of billions of dollars to state and local health departments because most of the money to the CDC is passed on. That means that in our communities, they're not going to be as well prepared, not just for the next pandemic or major infectious disease crisis, but for making sure the restaurant you go to for dinner is serving you food that doesn't make you sick. And when your kids go to the swimming pool, they can swim in that water without getting harmed. These are some of the things that the CDC has done that they're not able to do with what's taken place under this administration.
So, Doctor, when in your view do we start to see the effects, if we haven't already, of these cuts that you've been talking about?
Well, we are seeing them, and your reporting did such a nice job lifting that up, where a health department in Texas calls the CDC for assistance, and there's no one there to help. We heard early on in Milwaukee where they're dealing with lead in their water supply. They called the CDC, but the group that worked on lead poisoning had been let go. These are things that will affect people at the community level. It will continue to grow, but in general, public health is invisible when it's working properly. It's only when it's not working properly and then gets stressed. So whenever there's a crisis in a community and public health can't respond, then you will see it. And then hopefully people in their communities will say, this doesn't work for us. We need the CDC to be supported. We need our state and local public health departments to be supported.
Dr. Besser, why are we so divided when it comes to, there are those of us who are like, yeah, I trust the government. I trust the CDC and what they say. And then there are those that don't. Is it just politically motivated, or is it people who don't feel like they get good health care and so they're like, the system is just not working?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that there are a number of factors. Before COVID pandemic, the approval rating by both parties was very, very strong. With the COVID pandemic, there were mistakes that CDC made, but I led the CDC at the start of the H1N1 swine flu pandemic. And during that period, we saw extremely high approval ratings. And the reason for that was there was intentionally efforts to not politicize the response. People from both parties came together and said, we're going to do what it takes to keep people in our communities safe. What we recommend now may change as we learn more information. That's a good thing. With the COVID pandemic, whenever there was a change in guidance, it was jumped on as a sign that the agency didn't know what they were doing. And CDC wasn't allowed to talk directly to the public after the first 2 months in the pandemic. And that is a setup for disaster, because you need active communication to build trust and maintain trust. And once you've lost trust, it's extremely hard to get it back.
Dr. Besser, we've also seen this dismantle of the vaccine committee at the CDC, which decides which insurance people are going to be able to get their vaccines. So what does that mean to watch this dismantle of the vaccine policy as well?
Yeah, so I'm a general pediatrician, and I practiced pediatrics for more than 30 years. And I know that nothing I did as a pediatrician had more proven value than helping my patients make sure that they were vaccinated completely and on time. And that took spending a lot of time with parents, answering their really good questions so that they were comfortable making the right decision for their children. And I always said, if you have a question, if you want some honest information, go to the CDC website. They'll give you all the information. We can't do that anymore. And that is a major problem. We're seeing other organizations step up. The Academy of Pediatrics represents pediatricians. I'm a member of that group. They have guidance. We're seeing states come up with guidance. But the idea that we can't look to the CDC because this advisory group has become so politicized, so staffed with people who have strong anti-vaccine agendas, will put us at great risk. And what I'm hearing about the committee meeting for next week is that they will raise great concerns about safety in the COVID vaccine, safety concerns that have not been verified scientifically. And this, again, will lead people to be confused, and it will lead some people to make a decision that I think is not good for the health of their families.
All right. And as we know, confusion, uncertainty, never good. It doesn't matter what area of the world or our lives that we're talking about. Dr. Besser, thank you so much. Dr. Richard Besser, President and CEO of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, former acting director of the CDC, joining us from New Jersey on this Friday. Hey, Jessica, before you go, incredible story. Highly recommend everybody check it out on the Bloomberg and reading. And you do quote Dr. Besser. He said it here, and he said in a very short time, we've seen an incredible destruction of the agency that leaves people here and around the world at increasing risk. And of course, he was talking about the CDC. Your kind of thoughts after, having a further discussion with Dr. Besser and where we are in terms of healthcare in America?
It's going to be really interesting to watch what happens to public health across the U.S. Right now, we're seeing a bit of a piecemeal policy around vaccine policy in the U.S. too. States are kind of adopting their own guidelines or working together about how can we start making sure that COVID vaccines are still offered at pharmacies now as well. So we're seeing a state-by-state approach to public health now, which is difficult without the CDC because the CDC does provide that nationwide view of what's happening to the nation's healthcare.
Right. And it sounds like different states have different monies, and that will kind of determine some of the healthcare.
Well, not just that. I think insurance companies have an interesting position here because if the CDC doesn't necessarily recommend something, but states do, then what is an insurance company going to cover? And to what extent does that actually push somebody to get or not get a certain medicine?
That's a great question. And I think we're going to be seeing that play out, especially starting next year when the next plans start. As of this year, insurance companies are still going to cover vaccines. But health experts have been telling us and in our reporting that the cost of a vaccine is probably less than the cost of the illness that you're going to get later on, and then your hospital bill and everything else. So
that's the whole idea with preventative medicine, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. And folks have been preaching that for such a long time. Thank you so much. Your reporting and also joining us here, Bloomberg News health reporter Jessica Nix. Hey, coming up next, we're going to get into a new exchange on Wall Street South. That one, Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, continues. In the meantime, let's get a check on trading.
Charlie Pellet is standing by. He's got his close eye on the market. Closes in less than 90 minutes. Hey there, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. Let's take the health of the market right now with the Dow lower, the S&P, NASDAQ both advancing. S&P, NASDAQ both at record. Strong week on Wall Street, ending on a quiet note. S&P right now up 765.95, up 0.1%. The Dow down 168, down 0.4. NASDAQ up by 0.5%. 10-year 4.06% with a 2-year 3.55%. Spot gold trading higher by $14 the ounce, up by about 0.4%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.3, 62.57 for a barrel of WTI. Gemini space station shares jumped 22%, have been up as much as 64% from their IPO price after the cryptocurrency exchange led by the billionaire Winklevoss twins raised $425 million. BlackRock executive Rick Rieder rising up the list of contenders to serve as the next chair of the Fed after Jay Powell's term expires. He was interviewed for 2 hours today in New York by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York City. Hey, I don't know if you noticed, but today trading began at 9:30 a.m. Wall Street time on a new exchange. It wasn't, though, on Wall Street. It was the MIAX Sapphire Options Exchange trading floor. And yeah, it's like, again, more happening down south, specifically in the state of Florida when it comes to the investment world.
It's like you said, we can now call it Wall Street South for real.
Totally.
I guess.
Yeah.
Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta spoke earlier with Miami International Holdings Chairman and CEO Thomas Gallagher about the launch and becoming a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange.
Miami is becoming a global financial center. And one of the things that we wanted to do was create an environment where floor brokers and market makers could come down here. And also, there's a very favorable tax climate. When you look at some of the Northeast cities, New York, Philly, Chicago, you've got large state taxes. Here in Florida, there's no state tax.
All right, that was Miami International Holdings Chairman and CEO Thomas Gallagher with our Kriti Gupta earlier today. Full disclosure, Bloomberg and MIAX are launching futures and options and have a dedicated studio on the exchange floor. All right, let's head to Miami and to the co-host of the opening trade, Kriti Gupta. So, Kriti, I am still trying to get my head around these different exchanges. What is it specifically? Why does the investing world need it?
Well, it's fascinating because we're so used to talking about the NYSE, we're so used to talking about the NASDAQ, but ultimately when it comes down to it, we're talking about options trading that ultimately comes down to not the institutional traders, but the retail traders. And that's where this exchange kind of fills a gap that may not have previously been needed to be filled. An options exchange that makes it a little bit more easier, or at least the hope is that it will be a little bit easier for all those retail investors that want to have access to the S&P 500, but aren't able to because it's maybe too expensive, the barriers are too high, you have to be an institutional trader, trade in bulk. Options are a really easy way to do that. Now, this is an exchange that's been in the making for almost 20 years, and not only are they making or trying to make it a little more accessible for a retail and arguably an international audience, they're doing it in a really unique way where exchanges around the world are actually pulling back on having traders on the floor. Miami Exchange is leaning into it. And you can see that actually over my right shoulder here, we actually have real floor brokers making those trades in real time by talking to each other the way they did, say, 20 years ago.
You have to wonder if, with technology today, the necessity of that, considering that other exchanges such as the NASDAQ are pretty much fully electronic these days, not to mention the NYSE, which does have quite a few people there still. You said it was 20 years in the making, Kriti. Why did it take so long?
Well, it's fascinating because, look, this is a tricky thing to do ultimately, and getting a lot of the folks, a lot of the clients, a lot of the brokers on board, a lot of regulatory stories. You also have to think about where we are physically in the country. Miami is on the coast. There are infrastructure concerns here. One, that you really want to eliminate things like systemic risk. These are a lot of jargon for saying if the weather gets bad in Miami, if there's a hurricane, you want to make sure the financial system is secure, and that takes time to build, and that's where this infrastructure has really come about. Now, this is why the trading floor is so important. I got to mention, it's only been a few trades. It's the first day of the trading floor, but the hope here is that in a couple of years, it won't just be an options exchange. It'll be a commodities exchange, maybe even some speculation around a crypto exchange as well, but one that isn't just limited to institutional traders. It's retail traders, is democratizing the markets, and that's what this exchange stands for.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. Thank you so much. Kriti Gupta, co-host of the opening trade. Be sure to check out her full interview with Mr. Gallagher on this new exchange in Miami. You can find it on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com. Hey, in just a moment, we're going to get into Elon Musk, the man. So says one voice. And I really do mean that this one voice says he's the man. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. In the meantime, we're going to talk about one stock that's definitely on our mind today.
Gemini Space Station raising $425 million in an IPO, pricing its stock above a marketed range and shrinking the number of shares. It's the crypto firm. It's been around for years, led by the billionaire Winklevoss twins, sold about 15.2 million shares Thursday for $28 each. It said this in a statement confirming an earlier Bloomberg News report. Shares up 22.5%. As we speak, bouncing around a little bit, we've got with us Bloomberg News equity capital markets reporter Anthony Hughes. He joins us here in the Bloomberg Businessweek studio. Another successful crypto IPO, at least on the first day.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of crypto IPOs recently, or at least a few, and this one...
Bullish Circle, still doing well.
Yeah, Figure even earlier this week, and there's obviously a lot of demand for these types of IPOs because crypto's in vogue, and for all the reasons we've talked about many times before. But maybe the 20% uptick here was perhaps a little bit disappointing in some respects compared to what we've seen recently. I think Gemini went to a lot of effort here to engineer an outcome which was very positive. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it trades over the coming weeks. But there were some unusual things that happened during the marketing effort here, which probably were not sort of the normal thing you see on a traditional IPO.
All right, you say Vogue, and it makes me think of fashion. And so there's that coat with all the safety pins hanging off that is maybe good for a season, very much in the moment. And then there's
you got to get the coat with the Bitcoins on it.
Well, I was going to say, then there's the Burberry trench, which you can have forever. So when you say it's in vogue, are we still TBD in terms of crypto and understanding its final impact and whether or not it becomes ubiquitous in our world? And I realize when you say crypto, you're the expert, not me.
You're pointing at Anthony.
You're the expert. But I mean, there's stable coins, there's blockchain, there's a lot of ways to dice and slice it. So who knows how it settles. But is it still kind of TBD?
Yes, for sure. But I think what we've seen in the last few months is we've seen a few companies go public that do at least outline a use case for crypto in its different varieties. I mean, obviously Circle's a stable coin issuer, and they talk about the uses of that over time. And then Figure, that went public earlier this week, does sort of mortgage lending off the back on the blockchain. So I mean, I think that was an interesting one because it did try to outline a very specific use case. Whereas perhaps a lot of trading on crypto exchanges is really done by people who are just trading. And I mean, the amazing thing about crypto is even if Bitcoin maybe hasn't done heaps really in the last few months, but there's always this potential that something could happen and it doubles. And I think that's the thing that excites people about investing in crypto. The volatility that crypto has, and then by extension crypto stocks have, obviously is enticing to people who are traders. But, the question is, as crypto goes into the mainstream and, maybe crypto becomes less volatile, I mean, Bitcoin specifically becomes less volatile, and maybe if it becomes less volatile, it becomes less of a interesting trade, you could argue.
But we use these terms like crypto, and we use them in ways that are all encompassing in digital assets too. And really, like you said, Anthony, there's so many different parts of the market. I mean, we spoke to Sarah Levy at Betterment earlier this week at Futureproof, and she said, our customers have no interest in anything except for Bitcoin and Ether. They don't care about any of the altcoins. They don't care about anything else.
Yes.
And then you also have the stablecoin side of things, when you see that potentially being adopted by even non-financial firms and non-fintech firms. When you're speaking to your sources out there, what are they saying to you as sort of the most promising mainstream use when we use that overarching term?
I'm not sure that necessarily that's the way people are thinking about it. I think they're thinking that there's the purists who think that Bitcoin is everything and stablecoin is going to have uses that help you to convert a volatile currency into something stable that you can use for a lot of transactions. And I think there's the Figure IPO this week sort of looked at some of the efficiency savings, the cost savings you can potentially make in a process which is really quite complicated, like taking out a mortgage. I think if you've taken out a mortgage, you know that it's a very, can be a very manual and time-consuming and costly process. I love the idea of
putting like a home equity or mortgage on blockchain. It makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, so whether they can do this in real scale is a question, but obviously there's a lot of people who are pursuing ideas to try and make this happen. So, that's a little bit of an esoteric area. I think for the average person who's interested in crypto, they're just looking at the fact that Bitcoin has the potential to go up materially in a short space of time, and obviously that just excites traders. And I think if that's not the case, then maybe it's a different type of investment.
To put it simply, Carol, number go up.
Number go up. Yeah. Listen, Gemini has more than $21 billion of assets on the platform. It's a crypto exchange, a US dollar-backed stablecoin, crypto staking, digital asset custody, and a credit card that offers rewards in crypto. It sounds to me like that's like throwing stuff out a little bit to figure out, I'm not going to say what it is, but I mean, right? And kind of figuring out where it all goes.
Yeah, I don't think people were really enthralled about the financials of Gemini, but on the other hand, the Winklevoss twins obviously made a very early call on Bitcoin, which made them a lot of money. So they have great sort of following because of that. But Gemini itself, I don't know that people are really enthralled. I mean, some of the comments I've heard back this week is that this is very expensive stock. So, obviously they're going to have to really, as we say, grow into that valuation or prove that they can do more over time, but it's a competitive space too.
I thought you were going to say the Winklevoss twins made an early bet on Facebook, but that would be going back in time
That
even
too,
further.
right?
Yeah.
I will point out the stock is now up about 20%. It was up as much as almost 64% earlier in today's session, and it's now just under a $4 billion market cap. So, yeah, first day of trading.
Bloomberg News equity capital markets reporter Anthony Hughes here in the Bloomberg Businessweek studio. Let's head on over to Charlie Pellet, though, for an update on what's going on in the markets. Hey there, Charlie.
Well, I thank you very much, Tim. Indeed, we have got the S&P 500 index pushing higher. Best level of the day right now, up 10. That is a gain of 0.1%. Dow Industrials down 154, decline of 0.3%. NASDAQ, meanwhile, up 125 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, up by about 0.5%. Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares slumping now by 0.6%, but our Mag 7 Index holding on to a gain of 1.6%. The 10-year 4.06% with a 2-year 3.55%. Spot gold up $15 the ounce, $36.49 up 0.4%. West Texas Intermediate crude right now up 1.7%, $42.27 for a barrel of WTI. And Bitcoin is advancing by 1.8%. We do have Bitcoin right now trading at 116,531 on Bitcoin. Gemini pushing higher. Just talking about that stock. Gemini, first day of trading up by 21% right now, 34.03 on Gemini. Again, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ trading mixed. S&P up 9 right now, up by about 0.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, only he can lead the company's next phase, and his political engagement, it's up to him. That's just two of the many, many headlines out of the Bloomberg Technologies team interview with Tesla board chair Robyn Denholm. Bottom line, Tesla's chair saying Elon Musk is the man to continue to take Tesla to its next phase.
The board's responsibility is to look at who the CEO is for the next period of time. And we believe that Elon is the right CEO for Tesla over this transformative period of time. And our view is he's a generational leader. There aren't any other people out there like Elon who can actually lead the company over this next decade or so. And so once you decide who the leader should be, you need to put in place a compensation package to incent and motivate him to actually deliver.
Yeah, $1 trillion would motivate me as well. That, of course, was Tesla board chair Robyn Denholm talking to BTech, the BTech Dynamo dynamic duo of Ed Ludlow and Caroline Hyde. Ed is co-host of Bloomberg Technology every Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg TV. He joins us now from the Bloomberg News Bureau in San Francisco. Tesla shares, by the way, folks, rallying up about 6.5%, the number 2 gainer in both the S&P 500 and NASDAQ 100 today. Ed, well done, well done, well done. You guys covered so much. And there was and always is so much to cover when it's involving Elon and Tesla. What was a priority for you and Caroline and really your team as you thought about your interview with Robyn Denholm?
Yeah, when the news broke a week ago that there was a proposed pay package for Elon Musk, the headline was the $1 trillion value of the total award, right? But because of how the board had to communicate it in the proxy, it's like a very dense 300-plus page document that it's incumbent on shareholders to read. The specifics get lost a little bit. And for me, you guys mentioned the politics angle. One of the few things that was like very explicitly codified in the proxy was that the board had got reassurances from Elon Musk that he would wind down political activity. Now, actually, the big takeaway from the interview was that they are actually pretty relaxed about the idea that Musk might continue to have involvement in the political domain. You know, we pushed so hard. When you guys say political activity, and that was too casual. When the board says political activity, what do you even mean? We asked that. Do you mean Musk has told you he won't participate in a political party, or he'll stop making donations behind specific candidates or initiatives? And Denholm's response was really simple: it's up to Elon Musk what his political activity is, but they are reassured enough that this package, they will get in return somebody that will be focused on Tesla.
You know, it's I appreciated how you pushed her, Ed, because if you think about Elon Musk's own political evolution, I mean, he said in the spring of last year that he wasn't going to donate to either political candidate. This was when Joe Biden and Donald Trump were running against each other. That all changed after Butler, Pennsylvania, in the assassination attempt. And then, Elon went full-fledged and even served as part, in the administration in the capacity for Doge. So we saw how quickly he changed his mind in a very short period of time. So I guess it can only be up to him because he's the one who makes these decisions. I don't know.
Well, the way that Robyn Denholm put it, and this was an on-the-record, on-camera interview, and Miss Denholm, I'm sure, chose her words very carefully. But she said that Musk's political activity or time in government has concluded, and he is now back focused on Tesla. The main thing that we got to, it was a long interview, right? But the detail is so important in what the board is requiring of Elon Musk. These are not goals. The word goal is not correct to say that Musk gets $1 trillion in the end if he hits goals. They're mandatory requirements. And if he doesn't hit the operational and financial goals, Denholm was very clear, he doesn't get not the dollar value comp. But remember, at the heart of this is that Elon Musk's condition, it was a negotiation. And what he wanted was voting power. Because Musk's idea is that with greater voting power, he will be able to keep Tesla focused on a future that is about artificial intelligence, not necessarily the legacy of Tesla, which is selling electric vehicles to consumers.
Well, speaking of power and voting power and just power generally, I mean, there's been a lot of criticism, I think it's fair to say, Ed, of the Tesla board and who's in charge. And, Robyn Denholm, I mean, I'm looking at the Bloomberg description, Australian business executive, former accountant who's chair of Tesla, chosen by Elon in November of 2018 to be chair. And prior to that, she was relatively unknown. I'm just curious about the board, and correct me because you know this company.
No.
But
nothing's correct.
What do we need to know about the Tesla board and what they say and what it really means to what Elon can and can't do?
I regret not saying this out loud explicitly. If I did not then ask, I should have asked about it. But basically, the criticism from all kinds of investors, the biggest institutionals on Wall Street to the smallest retail investors, is that it's a rubber stamp board that just does what Elon Musk wants. There's something really important to understand, that it was a special committee that negotiated, meeting with Elon Musk 10 times, this compensation package. So Musk had input into it. But the special committee is made up of just two people, Robyn Denholm and then Kathleen Wilson-Thompson, who also kind of chairs the financial and comp committee on the Tesla board. A board of two, or a committee of two, because Elon Musk is on the board, so he recuses himself technically, even though he negotiates. And then his brother, Kimball Musk, is on the board of Tesla, but he's his brother, so he recuses himself from negotiating the comp. It actually was really important to say that out loud. Now, at the end of the day, it's a shareholder right to vote on this package on November 6th. And a lot of what Denholm was explaining, and she really wanted to get this across, this is a proposal. You have the right to vote on it. So you need to understand what's in it, even though there is some sort of, there is skepticism about how solid that board is. Robyn Denholm lives in Australia, for what it's worth, but I can tell you from conversations in the company, investors that I know, she's highly engaged, reads everything, knows everything that's going on.
Ed, well, you've been on air with us. There's been some breaking news that we'd love for you to react to. This about Apple, a company that you follow very closely. Mark Gurman reporting that Apple's AI and search executive, Robbie Walker, will leave the company. One of the iPhone maker's most senior AI executives, this according to people with knowledge of the matter. This follows a slew of folks who've left in recent months, not just to go to Meta platforms for those huge pay packages. What's your immediate reaction to this?
Well, I'm just checking at the stock. You guys have the ticker up. Okay, so the shares haven't sort of plummeted. What I know is limited about Robbie Walker. He had been reporting to John Giandrea, which I'm sure on this show you've discussed Mark's other reporting, which was about who was in charge. So to a point, John Giandrea had led the AI team, and a lot of the departures that we've reported on in aggregate that have left had been reporting onto him. But you have to remember that Craig Federighi, who's like the software chief, the software guru at Apple, he had sort of taken command of the team. So I guess, and I pull up the draft and I'm scrambling to find it, but forgive me for that. But I think that it's just a signal that these exits have continued since that restructure, is what I was going to say.
No, you're laying it out really well, and
we should remind everybody the news came
Yeah.
out when Ed was speaking about Tesla. So
yeah, it said after leaving, I guess, his Siri role, Walker became one of the top Apple execs working on the new AI-powered web search system to compete with Perplexity and ChatGPT. It's scheduled to debut next year. So kind of fluid, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing this deliberately because it's relevant. You know, part of the Denholm conversation about why it has to be Elon Musk that leads Tesla is that you have right now this huge talent war. Apple is one of the losers of it, let's be honest, based on the reporting. Meta is paying over the nose to get people. And Denholm's argument about Elon Musk is that he is a draw. So the compensation doesn't really matter. People want to go and work for him because he's seen as this great engineering mind, and he's so hands-on, you know, in the trenches. I believe he's been, the building I was in is 3000 Hanover Street, which is like the global engineering HQ. And Elon Musk was there this week and getting involved and stuff. That's the landscape right now. So these stories are so interesting because for AI, you know, the human capital, the human intelligence that's building out AI, that is a battleground, right? And that's all I'm reflecting on, yeah.
All right, great stuff as always. Thank you, Ed Ludlow. Breaking news, or talking about breaking news in real time, as well as folding it into an incredible interview that he and Caroline Hyde of the Bloomberg Tech team had with the chair of Tesla's board. Ed Ludlow, as we said, co-host of Bloomberg Tech, joining us from our San Francisco bureau. Apple, let's just rehash, because the stock did take a little bit of a dip down, but it's kind of bounced back. It's still a gain of about 1.6% here, Tim.
Robbie Walker, one of the iPhone maker's most senior AI executives, is leaving the company. This according to people with knowledge of the matter. Mark Gurman reporting this just moments ago. One of the few reports to Apple's AI chief. He was in charge of Siri until earlier this year before oversight of the voice assistant was shifted to Craig Federighi. That move came after promised changes to the future were publicly postponed, marking a high-profile setback.
All right, certainly one stock watching. I'm Carol Massar, along with Tim Stenovec. Let's get to some stocks on the move on this Friday. With us is Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Isabelle Lee. Isabelle, the Mag 7, always front and center, and you've got two that you are watching, Alphabet and Amazon.
Alphabet and Amazon, and both are kind of moving in opposite directions. Amazon shares are down by almost 1%, while Alphabet is up by 0.3%. So both are reacting to the FTC investigating whether they both misled advertisers that place ads on their website. That's according to people familiar with the matter. So the probes mark a front in the regulatory scrutiny, even as these tech companies try to win the approval of President Donald Trump. So judges overseeing two Justice Department cases against Google have already found that the company has illegal monopolies in online search. And I think this is also very topical because digital advertising has really overtaken offline advertising, and it's really just becoming a big deal, especially with vast troves of consumer data that online ads can target. I mean, even with us in news, it's one thing to have a print story, but online is where you think things live forever.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't have a good segue. You know, I was like, you got so insider baseball there at the end when talking about these tech companies. Let's go sort of old school here. Warner Brothers Discovery.
Warner Brothers Discovery shares are higher by 20%. The ticker is WBD. So they're extending a Thursday rally after Paramount's guidance is said to be preparing a bid for the company. So this is the Hollywood studio taken over by filmmaker David Ellison, the son of Oracle's Larry Ellison. So Paramount shares are also slightly up. So Barclays says if this deal goes through, it will be a significant strategic positive for both companies. And a merger would combine companies with recognizable movies and TV shows, and again, shrink legacy media studios from 4 to 5.
This stock is on a tear this week, and it's up like 60%. I get it. I mean, when you jump as much as you have.
What does this mean for David Zaslav?
I have no idea.
I would imagine a pay package if this deal goes through.
And to be
if the deal goes through.
those who watch his compensation would say he's been pretty good.
Yeah,
his compensation
I think it's fair to say, yeah.
Yeah. All right, one more. We've got to ask you about Gemini. It's something we've been talking about. It's been trading for about an hour now, and this is one of the IPOs in a very, very busy week.
Very busy week. The ticker is Gemini. The stock is up by more than 20%. And this is a great deal for the company because the crypto exchange raised more than $400 million in a packed week for U.S. listings. And this is founded in 2014 by Winklevoss twins, or some call them Winklevi. And Gemini has more than $21 billion of assets in the platform. So the IPO, again, comes as a busy week, which could be good or bad because maybe it shows that appetite may be fatigued. But again, this shows that no, you still see a hunger, you still see appetite. And Gemini joins a rush of crypto listings that we saw this year, from stablecoin issuer Circle to crypto exchange Bullish. So I think people are really excited for Gemini space station with shares jumping.
History will tell us whether this is a lot happening on and is a sign of a top.
That is fair.
Or the sign of a really significant trend to come. All right, Isabelle, thank you so much. Stock Movers Podcast, 5-minute episodes. Find it on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. If you're watching on TV, the close is coming your way in just a moment. Tim and I continue with some great stuff right here on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.